Is it possible there's going to be a second ticket switch in this race, Bill Kristol?
I mean, no one thought the first one was possible, right? So in for a dime, in for a dollar. That's my view. And I wonder if Trump actually thinks a little that way. Like, gee, they all told, they were all saying you can't do that. And Biden did it. Seems to be helping them. Why should I be stuck in this kind of old-fashioned thinking that the first guy we nominate is the guy we have to stick with?
Hello and welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm your host, Tim Miller. It is Monday, July 29th. We've got the Venezuelan election sham, Donald Trump zeroing in on his anti-Kamala message, the veep stakes, Slayer Pete on Fox. But first, I've got Bill Kristol, and the best thing to do with Bill Kristol is a little gossip. And is it possible there's going to be a second ticket switch in this race, Bill Kristol?
I mean, no one thought the first one was possible, right? So in for a dime, in for a dollar. That's my view. And I wonder if Trump actually thinks a little that way. Like, gee, they all told, they were all saying you can't do that. And Biden did it. Seems to be helping them. Why should I be stuck in this kind of old-fashioned thinking that the first guy we nominate is the guy we have to stick with?
We obviously are referring to J.D. Vance. There's just been the J.D. rollout has been disastrous on style and substance. I guess there's a little, some in MAGA world, some positive buzz around his remarks on Saturday in Minnesota. But even still, the degree of vulnerabilities he's brought to the table, emphasizing all of Trump's weaknesses, particularly with women. They're at least thinking about it. You do buzz. There's at least some people in MAGA world that are thinking about it. They're at least doing some due diligence, maybe looking to see if they could get rid of him.
I mean, I was told over the weekend that they've asked some lawyers, not in the campaign, but close to the campaign, to make sure that he can be replaced, that he can be certainly within the next 10 days or so. It gets a little more complicated after that. And so, I think they're worried about him, and they're right to be worried, because a lot of these scandals, you and I have been through this a few times, It's something someone said 20 years before, or they wrote in a student newspaper, or they were, drunk driving, 15 years ago or something. This is not in the past. And that the nominee then has a 12-year record after that where he or she's behaved responsibly, right? This is right now. He said these things 3 years ago. He reiterated them this year. This is what he believes. It's not even like Trump, who sort of had he's a 78-year-old guy, and he has a certain vulgar, to say the least, and unseemly and bad record on respect for the opposite sex and so forth. But still, he's like, people have a little discount of it. That's what 78-year-old vulgar rich guys, that's kind of the way they behaved in the past. And Vance is choosing this as a young person. This is what he's embracing it. This is his thing. In fact, it's the one thing anyone knows about him. He has no legislative accomplishments, obviously, right? So I think the degree to which this doesn't go away, the degree to which this isn't a 48-hour story, the degree to which this is getting imprinted on Vance's persona, so to speak, that's very dangerous. It is dangerous for them. And of course, as you say, it complements what people think about Trump anyway.
Well, let's just, on the persona side of things, we were talking about the childless cat lady clip that everybody's kind of zeroed in on. The interview was a couple years ago, but it was during the Trump presidency. To your point about how this stuff is present, not past, it was 2021 interview with Tucker Carlson. He's asked about it with Megyn Kelly over the weekend. Let's see how deft he is in cleaning up his insult to childless cat ladies with Megyn Kelly.
Obviously, it was a sarcastic comment. I've got nothing against cats. I've got nothing against dogs. I've got one dog at home, and I love him, Megyn. But look, this is not, people are focusing so much on the sarcasm and not on the substance of what I actually said. And the substance of what I said, Megyn, I'm sorry, it's true.
So I've got nothing against cats. So let's just diagram that. So you insult childless cat ladies. And then when you're asked about it, you say, I've got nothing against cats. So I guess he does still have something against the ladies, the voters.
I think he insulted them a little more, honestly, in that segment with Megyn Kelly. And then, was it last night, he was on Fox with Trey Gowdy. Mm-hmm. And Trey Gowdy opens up with a minute. I don't ever watch it, so I don't know, but I don't think this is really usual, maybe, with about a 2-minute monologue where he personally shows real discomfort with this, tells a little story about himself with a couple of childless ladies whom he respected very much. They turn out to be nuns. It's a nice story, whatever. And And then and Vance is coming on after this monologue.
Yeah.
And so Gowdy opens the door for Vance to kind of walk it back again. And again, Vance doesn't do it. And I got to think, if you're Trump watching this today, you think, geez, I mean, we've given him 2 chances here on our favorite network almost favorite network to get out of this. And maybe he's not getting the message. And I don't know. Trump likes firing people, right?
Supposedly. I like saying he likes to fire people more than he likes doing it. But he also, if you're Trump, your newsletter this morning has kind of this imaginary conversation between Trump and Don Jr. And if you're Trump, you kind of have this feeling of, I get to be the one that does this sort of stuff. I get to be the one that does like rude and inappropriate things, and then like kind of makes jokes about it and insults it. Like that's me, but you don't really get to do it. Like, you're here to help me, right?
Right.
I do think there's that little bit of element. There's one other in this conversation, kind of in the behind the scenes, buzz about what to do about Vance. There's another like tangible problem that he's brought to the ticket, which is on the money side. And I'm sure that many of these guys will come around. They've all come around a million times before. But, Vance, part of the argument for choosing him, right, was this nonsense argument that upper Midwestern, white men like him, which there's not really any evidence for. But the other is that like he supports this pivot to nationalism and populism, and that's more aligned with Trump, and that there's this other cache of Peter Thiel type donors and stuff that want the party to move that way, and so they'll support it. But like the downside of that is like the traditional Republican donors, like the old Bush Romney world donors who like have like reluctantly held their nose for Trump, like they're not excited about this. And having Vance out there hurting you with those donors and hurting you with voters, I feel like it has the possibility to, resonate more with Trump when he's hearing from rich guys that are pissed about it too.
I mean, I'm told, admittedly, third hand, probably second hand, third hand, something like third hand, that this happened. But I think it sounds right. Trump apparently raised this issue when Don Jr. and Tucker were pushing Vance. And he talks to all these donors all the time. That's who he has dinner with every night at Mar-a-Lago, basically. And some of these donors are kind of pro-Ukraine. And even if they're, and they're on board with Trump, but they're not as put off as they should be. But they're concerned. And he said, I don't know, isn't Vance like sticking it to them? Shouldn't a more, I don't know what like a neutral pick, Tim Scott, Burgum type, wouldn't it reassure these guys? And Trump is explicitly told, look, some of these Ken Griffin, Paul Singer type donors may shy away from Vance. They do care a little bit about, NATO and Ukraine and stuff like that. But you're going to get Elon Musk and Peter Thiel, and those guys will make it up. The money will be fine. And then Elon Musk seems to back off from this $45 million a month he's allegedly giving to a super PAC, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm told that Trump sort of has raised that with people like, well, wait a second, you told me that Musk and Thiel would replace the older donors. And I don't quite, Thiel, there's an article, was it over the weekend somewhere, that, well, he likes to pick a Vance, of course, he pushed for Vance, but he's not so sure he's really into giving money these days to campaigns and to super PACs. It's like, if you're Trump, it's like, wait a second, I mean, I'm going to have to pay a financial price for taking this guy too. So I don't know. I mean, the firing thing, you're right that Trump doesn't personally like to fire people. He's sort of chicken that way. Yeah. But the people who say, well, Trump could never admit a mistake, I don't know. Trump fired a zillion people in the first term. And all he says is, I got kind of deceived by the recommendation. They turned out not to be really loyal or competent. And I getting rid of this guy. And he never paid a price, right? He was able to turn his supporters against him. Yeah. Now, maybe it's harder, I grant, with Vance than with John Bolton or H.R. McMaster or Reince Priebus or whatever. But Trump's experience of firing people who he doesn't think are doing a good job for him is not, oh my God, I pay a price every time I do it. It's, I've gotten away with it every time I do it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that as a practical matter, we're being a little cheeky here. As a practical matter, it's really tough to get rid of Vance. I mean, the logistics of it are challenging. B, to your point, the environment around it. It's kind of like, what, you're going to replace him with Doug Burgum, right? You do, at some point, there is some kind of message that's sent to MAGA world. Like there's a category of vocal people that are excited about Vance, and that, you're in that he made this pick to kind of signal the change of the party. And then like after one bad week, you're like, okay, I'm going to go back to some old, a stuffed shirt kind of, Chamber of Commerce Republicans.
So I've thought about this in my fantasy world of that this could happen. I think he probably picks, don't you think he has to maybe goes to a woman if he gets rid of Vance? Elise Stefanik would not be a crazy pick. She's all in on MAGA, but she's not. She doesn't have this particular problem with Vance. Maybe Sarah Sanders. I don't know. I feel like there's a couple of picks available to him.
Those both seem better, by the way. I do think just practically, I think it's very unlikely. I think the fact that the discussion is happening, it's true, and it's worth us, discussing it as well, and stoking the embers a little bit. But just objectively, how could Elise Stefanik have been worse than this?
No, exactly. I think that's right. Same. I think she's almost. I didn't actually look it up. I meant to before the show. She's almost exactly the same age as Vance, right? Yeah. But she's been in Congress longer, and she's more stood up under pressure pretty well, right? And she did a good job of that hearing with running against the college presidents isn't a bad thing to do against the college campuses in September and October when they reopen. That's kind of her thing these days, right? Yeah. So anyway. Far be it for me to promote Elise Stefanik, who I once knew and very much disapprove of, but here we are, right? But I'm just saying, objectively, again, analytically, I agree. It's a super long shot. It doesn't happen very often. It happened in 1972 with Tom Eagleton, kind of unjustly, I think, but it turned out he'd had this electroshock, I guess, therapy for depression. Kind of an impressive guy, Eagleton. When I read up, I've forgotten this when I read up on him to see he was on the ticket for 18 days before McGovern dumped him. So.
What day are we in right now?
What's that?
What day are we in right now? We're coming up on 18,
10,
right?
10 or so, right? Thursday. Well, 10, 11.
I guess Wednesday, 11. Yeah. Okay. Well, I meant it less as a compliment to Elise Stefanik and more of an insult to JD Vance that he clearly would be at this point. She clearly would have been better than him, but dealer's choice on how you want to take that. One last JD thing. There's been on the left, the Democrats have coalesced around a talking point. One that I can't take credit for this. I'm not patting myself on the back, but it's a talking point that I've been promoting aggressively for years now that the Democrats should use on these guys. And well, let's just listen to it before we get to the clip. The voices you're about to hear in this mashup, it's a mashup that Jen Psaki put together, are Governor of Minnesota Walz, Chris Murphy, and Brian Schatz together, then Andy Beshear of Kentucky, then J.B. Pritzker, and then Kamala. Let's take a listen.
Democrats have kind of organically settled on a new attack line against Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. Basically, these guys are just plain weird.
Freedom to tell your kids what they can read. That stuff is weird. They come across weird. They seem obsessed with this.
We're using this fake living room to talk to you about a super weird idea from J.D. Vance.
Yeah, it's quite weird.
What was weird was him joking about racism today and then talking about Diet Mountain Dew. Who drinks Diet Mountain Dew?
On the other side, they're just weird. They really are.
Some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird.
What do you think, Bill?
First of all, you're not giving yourself enough credit, and Sarah too. You guys have been promoting this in a way for quite a while. Promoting is not even the right word. Sarah's focus groups show that, and our experience in 2022, Republican voters against Trump experience doing stuff again in Arizona and Michigan and Pennsylvania against these right-wing Trumpy candidates. I think, Sarah, we were all against them primarily because they were like Trump, threats to the constitutional order, the rule of law. They were election deniers. But I think in the actual testimonials that all these voters in those states did, what they said is they're extreme, they're strange. It was a little less, they said this about the 2020 election and therefore I'm voting against them. That was part of it, though. Yeah. So I think it works. I think extreme needs to be combined with weird. Otherwise, weird becomes one of these insults that sort of fades away after a few days. And it's like, okay, fine, he's a little weird, but now we're used to him, And there has to be substance behind it. I think the people who are saying weird because he said this is much better than just saying the word weird. But weird and extreme, I think, works pretty well.
I think it really works for JD. And it worked for Mark Kelly against Blake Masters. I had friends doing polling on that race. In certain types of polls, they ask, do you have a favorable opinion of somebody? What do you think about the economy? Basic questions like that. And then they have an open-ended question like, what do you think about Blake Masters? And the number of people in the open-ended, they're like, he's strange, he's weird, he's creepy, like really jumped out at the pollsters that I was talking to as like, that's not something you often see in those kind of verbatims. Vance and Masters kind of do have a similar carriage. And so I think that there's something there. You can overdo it, of course. I didn't understand what Andy Bashir's point there was. I don't think it's that weird to drink my Diet Mountain Dew. You can drink it if you want. But the cat lady stuff and some of the other just kind of obtuse, far right, super online weirdo meme stuff they get into, I think is exploitable.
Agreed.
I want to get to now Trump over the weekend. There was a clip that was going around. That's something that he says kind of a lot, but it just caught on. This happens with Trump because very few people watch, this full 2-hour speeches, and so then he has a lot of weird shtick. If the only thing you see is Hannibal Lecter and the sharks, like that's weird, but that's only like 45 seconds of a speech. He speaks for 2 hours, so he's got a lot of shtick. And this line that he used at the Turning Point Believers Summit, this is for Christian youth in West Palm Beach, was going around social media this weekend. And let's take a listen.
I don't care how, but you have to get out and vote. And again, Christians, get out and vote just this time. You won't have to do it anymore. 4 more years, you know what? It'll be fixed. It'll be fine. You won't have to vote anymore, my beautiful Christians. I love you, Christians. I'm a Christian. I love you. Get out. You got to get out and vote. In 4 years, you don't have to vote again. We'll have it fixed so good you're not going to have to vote.
I'm a Christian. Really? Well, Bill, what are your initial thoughts to that?
You said something about, you said his shtick, it could be a little weird. I agree with that. I also think somehow the edge comes off it with Trump because it's such a shtick. I mean, that clip you play, it's so nuts, right? My beautiful Christians. And what is he? He's a Christian. He remembers that he's supposed to say that. It makes it sound like he's talking about these oddball followers he has.
These other people.
Which is what he has in his mind, of course. And then he reminds himself, real time, I'm a Christian. So, if I can just tie it back to the Vance. Vance has none of that shtick-like character, which I think helps Trump more than people realize. It's a little bit like a, Henny Youngman. He's insulting me, but he's not really insulting me because it's a shtick, and whereas Vance is so earnest about it. But
yeah, people are dialing in also on the, you're not going to have to vote anymore. There's not going to be elections part of it. I just wanted to focus on that element for a second because on the one hand, I think Trump deserves criticism for this stuff because of his own behavior in 2020. He has opened himself up to this line of criticism that, people are like, maybe he means that he's going to cancel all elections. And I think that Trump intentionally plays into this. Like Trump has this part of the shtick is, I'm going to say things that I know the media and the never Trumpers are going to clutch their pearls about. And I'm going to say this stuff and it's going to make them seem crazy because they're going to be out there saying he wants autocracy, he wants a dictatorship. When all I'm saying really is that, like, I'm going to do things so great that you're never going to need to vote again. Everything's going to be fixed, which is a kind of an absurd argument in itself since he's already been president and things weren't fixed. But I that kind of, sort of tightrope walk. I'm just wondering how you think people should respond to that. Because on the one hand, he deserves the criticism. On the other hand, you don't want to play into his hands by sounding hysterical.
Yeah, I'm a little of two minds about it. I mean, he really is a danger as an autocrat, and he did really try to overturn the 2020 elections. I'm not sure that taking an ambiguous, kind of slightly goofy statement like the one he just made may not be the best way to make that point when you have January 6th right there in your face, So I guess I'm slightly of the view that this statement is more in the ridiculous, I can fix it category, as opposed to the super scary, I'm going to try to overturn the next election category. But they sort of slide together, as you say.
They do slide together. And I think this is why. So it's important to, I think, play them in concert with. So here he is at that event Saturday that I mentioned that Vance spoke at. They're at a hockey center in St. Cloud, Minnesota. I think this was booked back when Biden was still the nominee, and they wanted to pretend like Minnesota was in play. Maybe Minnesota would have been in play with Biden. Not really in play anymore. A recent poll had the vice president up by 6 in Minnesota. I think it's the only one we've seen since she's taken over the spot as presumptive Democratic nominee. The Minnesota Post noted in this speech that he also, not only was it outdated in the location where it was held, but it was outdated in the subject matter. He kept making anti-Biden points, and then it would have to remind himself that he was running against someone else. But there's one element of that speech I wanted to pull out and play for people. Let's listen.
If they don't cheat, we win this state easily, okay? They cheat. They have no shame. They cheat. Do you understand that, you crooked people? They're the most crooked. They cheat. They cheated in the last election, and they're going to cheat in this election, but we're going to get them.
To me, that's a category difference, right? Like the first one, he's trying to do the joking thing. This is real. This is demagogic, and that's angry, and that's a demagogue. And I think that it's important to show both of those clips together.
No, I'm glad you did that. I missed that myself, not watching all 2 hours of his speech.
Right.
No, and that's an incitement to violence and to all kinds of things, both, incidentally, before the election day, you could argue, right? You got to stop the cheating by having people with guns show up at the polling places in certain neighborhoods, to prevent cheating. And then, of course, after election day, too, if it's at all closed. So, yeah, that is more dangerously demagogic. I agree.
Yeah. It's like we're in Minnesota saying they're only going to win if they cheat. It's like the Republicans haven't won Minnesota in ages, which takes us to the Veep stakes. And one such candidate. I want to focus on Mayor Pete and his quasi audition, I think, on Fox over the weekend. But while we're on Minnesota, tons of momentum for Tim Walz. I'll just put my cards on the table. I think that I like his presentation. He does talk like a normal person. I'm begging Democrats to talk like a normal person. He doesn't, talk like, a politician with lots of, flowery phrases and, kind of languid. He speaks like a former teacher, right? Speaking to this class. I like that. I do worry a bit about, one of the vice president's vulnerabilities being, sending out that tweet about trying to raise money for the bail fund for people that were rioting in Minnesota, kind of reanimates George Floyd. There's just a little bit of this "we're not going back" thing. And do we want the person that was a governor there, that was in the midst of all of those fractious battles, to bring that stuff back up? I haven't heard a lot of conversation around that about Walz. It's mostly people being like, "Whoa, I've never heard of this guy, and he's great making fun of JD Vance on TV." And that's true. I do like that, but I worry a little bit about the George Floyd stuff. I don't know. What's your sense of Walz?
Yeah, the same. I think he talks like a normal person, looks like a normal person. So far as one can tell, he is a normal person and more normal than most politicians. And he's good at the kind of normal person attack on the weirdness of Vance and Trump. So I think in that way he would play well and goes down easy, so to speak, as a spokesperson for the ticket. He'll be an excellent surrogate if he's not vice president. Yeah, I think I just noticed they put out, La Savita put out a video of Harris from 2020 urging people to give money to this bail fund in Minneapolis and Minnesota, which does seem to have bailed out some, unfortunately, maybe it's worth having a bail fund for poor people and so forth, but still bailed out some pretty bad criminals who committed other crimes. So a little Willie Horton like there. Minneapolis, I just went back and looked for 5 minutes online. Minneapolis was in bad shape in the summer of 2020. And you have Governor Walz sort of saying we didn't handle this well at first, which is commendable candor. And I'm not sure any governor handles that tough a situation that well. And the governor doesn't have total power. There's a mayor, but whatever it was on his watch, so to speak, that Minneapolis was one of the more vivid examples of the riots, of the demonstrations turning into riots, actually, and genuinely getting out of control. And Walz says that himself in one clip, the New York Times story I saw from that post George Floyd moment. So again, it's not a showstopper. Everyone has negative things, as you and I were discussing earlier. Every vice presidential candidate, every politician has something in the negative balance sheet, so to speak. But I just say the only thing, in addition to the George Floyd riots in particular, I mean, he is a liberal governor. He's a reasonable liberal governor, but a more orthodox liberal, I think it's fair to say, than most of the other VP candidates being talked about. And Harris, again, kind of rightly or wrongly, is viewed as sort of on the left or center-left side of the party, certainly, let's say, to the left of Biden. And it just seems basic politics that if you're slightly on the left of where the average voter you have to get is, you don't pick another candidate, a VP candidate, who's also probably a little to the left of where the average voter you have to get is, which is not the, he's been a good politician in Minnesota, but that's a little to the left of the country. So again, I think Harris Walz could be a perfectly fine ticket, but I think not as strong. It doesn't do quite as much for you as some of the other VP picks, I think, and a little risky because of the salience of the crime issue and the weird accident, I suppose, or whatever, of Harris having this Minnesota fund that she somehow got plugged into, and then him being the governor of Minnesota at that time.
I agree with that. So for our two other things on Walz really quick, for our progressive listeners will listen to this list and think, wow, these things are all great. But to your point of what his agenda has been as Minnesota governor, I'm stealing this from Kyle Kalinske, who tweeted it complimentarily. Universal free school meals, legal weed, carbon-free electricity by 2040, 12 weeks paid family leave and paid sick leave. That's probably part of the Harris agenda. Either way, a bunch of laws related to gun laws, conversion therapy, free public college under 80,000, $2.2 billion increase in K-12 funding, sectoral union bargaining for nursing home workers. I mean, all that. There's nothing on there that I'm like, wow, you're an extreme socialist, right? But just to the point of, and maybe this is a plus, right? Maybe that you can argue this is a plus. I just think it's worth noting that compared to the other people on the Veep stakes list, he has the most, I would say, doctrinaire progressive record. And, some people are going to see that as a plus. I think that there's maybe an argument for trying to soften the vice president's, public image. I do want to shout out Walz on one thing because I think this was crazy. As I was learning about him, you got to give him props. He is a football coach and a high school teacher in rural Minnesota in 1999. He enlists as a soldier that year in the Minnesota National Guard. A student at the school where he was also teaching geography in addition to being a football coach, wanted to start a gay-straight alliance. He mentors the kid that wants to start a gay-straight alliance and helps them do it. And this was rural Minnesota in 1999. This was around the time of where Democrats, Bill Clinton, was just after Bill Clinton had signed the Defense of Marriage Act and Don't Ask, Don't Tell. Here he is, doing this as an enlisted soldier in the Minnesota National Guard. Here's his quote at the time. It really needed to be the football coach who was a soldier and was straight and was married, Walz said. In other words, he'd be a symbol that disparate worlds could coexist peacefully. Big props for that. And I think it definitely shows kind of an internal strength and a clear-eyed and a moral clarity that wouldn't be too bad to have in a vice president.
I don't think either of us seen him enough to know. I mean, the candidate quality could be high as in the best clips of him, or it could be more pretty good, and
sure,
I think that would matter a lot. And I do think with Harris too, there needs to be something that a little Clintonian that plays against liberal type.
We also have Mayor Pete I want to turn to. And there's another skill set that I think is worth valuing as we discuss this process. Here, let's take a listen to just one clip of him just absolutely eviscerating Shannon Bream on Fox News this weekend.
He didn't keep his promise of 6% economic growth. He didn't keep his promise to drain the swamp.
He did have a pandemic to deal with.
But even before the pandemic, America went into a manufacturing recession, which really hurt places like where I come from in the industrial Midwest. But anyway, my point is, he broke his promise for that kind of economic growth. He broke his promise to pass an infrastructure bill, right? He said he would do that. He failed to do it. The Biden-Harris administration got it done. He even broke his promise to that January 6th mob when he said, I will be at your side when you march down to the Capitol. But he actually did keep two promises. He kept his promise to destroy the right to choose in this country, and he kept his promise on tax cuts for the rich. And if you want to know what a second Trump term would be like, I would start by looking at those rare promises that he actually managed to keep.
Who dog? That's just 1 minute. That went on and on. Poor Shannon Bream. I'm stealing this from somebody who said that Pete's like a snake charmer, trying to. Shannon's doing her best to represent the Trump line, and he's just bringing her along with him. Anyway, what were your thoughts on that?
I mean, Pete is uncommonly good, obviously, and candidate quality really matters. And certainly on Walz, I don't think either of us seen him enough to know. I mean, the candidate quality could be high as in the best clips of him, or it could be more pretty good, you know, and
Sure,
I think that would matter a lot. And I do think with Harris too, there needs to be something that a little Clintonian that plays against liberal type.
Yeah.
Pete is fantastic though, and he does it on Fox, right? Which has got I don't know if there are any actual Fox viewers of Shannon Bream who are now going to be more open to voting for the Harris whoever ticket. But there are others who are sort of Fox adjacent who will think, you know what, he went on Fox and he held us totally composed and polite and just makes the case in such a devastating way.
Yeah, conceivably, there are some Fox viewers, by the way.
Yeah.
I was like I said, I had breakfast with Jeb last week. He might be a swing voter. He's watching Fox. So I think that there are others in that vein of, that are Atlanta suburbs, lifetime Republican voting men who are like looking for an excuse to not vote for Donald Trump. And Pete goes on there and can do it. I like how he, deftly, kind of drops in a January 6th hit on a question out of nowhere. Like he doesn't, but he does it in kind of the sly way where it's, Trump even broke his promise to the rioters. Trump told the rioters he'd be there with them. Instead, he was sitting in the Oval Office eating hamburgers, watching it on TV. I like that. I like the, manufacturing side of things. It's like, oh, this is, she's like, oh, well, like, no, Trump got screwed over by COVID. And Pete is going like, no, actually, we're in a manufacturing recession before COVID started, and we've invested all this in red states and in our community since. He has a way of speaking the language, and I think that the clip is important. But to your point about Walz, and this is, I would throw in every other candidate besides Pete in this bucket. We don't know. They might be good. They might be not good. Even Shapiro, who I think is pretty deft and pretty good, he might turn out to be really good. He might turn out to just be okay. Pete, we know, is going to be really freaking good. And I don't know. I've been not the biggest Pete cheerleader for this pick just because of the identity stuff and the baggage that you bring. It's like, ugh, we're gonna do a black woman and a gay man. Is it a lot for people to swallow? Is it a bit too big of a spoonful in one bite? But on the other hand, it's like, that he will crush, and he's already been vetted. There's not going to be a round of, the South Bend police force. Like, we already did all that. Already did all that in 4 years ago, like his random controversies from his previous life. So I don't know. The more I think about it, the longer this has gone on, the more I've been like, maybe she should just really think about Pete.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I've sort of been there from the beginning, but everyone just scoffs at me when I say it, frankly. So maybe she's just ruling it out, and maybe she's right too. Honestly, she has a decent chance to win the election just by playing it a little safer. For me, it's actually also the fact that he's in the Biden administration. It's a slight downside, along with the identity politics. It's a little two people from the Biden-Harris administration running to succeed Biden, whereas one advantage of the VP pick is it fully separates Harris, as it were, from Biden. It's now Harris X. Now, that may not be true, as Pete has his own image, apart from working for Biden, obviously. One thing just on the candidate skill, this you've really been through more recently than I, running for president is different from running for governor. And Pete ran for president, and Pete did an excellent job. We all just take it for granted that he kind of came pretty close. He was like tied for first in Iowa, and then just second, I can't remember anywhere in New Hampshire. But I mean, he was right up there in the very top tier, starting from 16th probably, right? I mean, in that field. And that shows he did it all. I mean, the candidate skills you have to do that at the presidential level and go through a zillion debates and a zillion interviews, and not all friendly ones, obviously. And incidentally, that clip that's kind of packaged that's not so great about everything Harris said as she was contorting herself to try to appeal to the left in 2019. You've seen that, obviously. And that is a bit of a problem. She can walk away from most of those things. Fracking, she's already done so. But Pete didn't do that. I mean, think about that. He went through a very kind of bad, I'm going to say, Democratic primary, bad for quite a long time until they coalesced behind Biden, where people were kind of looking foolish mostly. And he and I would say Klobuchar maybe are the two who really did fine, and Sanders, if you wanted that, you know what I mean? But they were the kind of the ones who I think came out of it looking maybe better than when they went in, or as good as when they went in. So again, the degree to which the candidate skills matter and the degree to which being tested in a way he has been, and even Shapiro, whom I very much respect, and the others really haven't been. They just haven't run for national office. Am I right that he's the only one on the list who's run for national office? I guess that's true. Yeah.
Finished. I even forgot, even as running the Pete fan club over here at the Bulwark back in 2020, I forgot how close he got in New Hampshire. He only lost to Bernie by 3,900 votes, 1.3%. He was in second place in New Hampshire, very close to a Iowa, New Hampshire sweep from Pete. So I don't know. There is something to be said for it. I always go back to like my very first meeting with John Huntsman, God love him, in 2012, where he was like, we were kind of briefing him for what was to come on the media side. And he said, I've dealt with the Utah press. I've dealt with the Salt Lake City press. They're pretty tough. I've been through these things to me. And, and I was like, I think it's going to be a little bit different, boss. I think that it's a different animal. And, he, to his credit, I forget what it was, a month later, a couple weeks later, was like, yeah, okay, you guys were right. I need to run through some more paces here. It is different. And Pennsylvania is much closer. The Pennsylvania governor election media environment is much closer to the Utah governor media environment than it is to a vice presidential ticket presidential environment. So I think that is a case for Pete that is worth making. That said, the reporting, who knows the credibility of all this sort of stuff, but the reporters who would be in a position to know are indicating that Shapiro and Kelly out of Arizona and Walz are the top contenders at the moment. Before we move on to Kamala, anything on Kelly? Any thoughts on Mark Kelly?
No, I feel like I personally don't know his candidate skills well enough.
Yeah.
Shapiro, I just would come back, and maybe at the end when you're uncertain, you default to the fact that, you know what, you have to in Pennsylvania. Shapiro won it by 15 points 2 years ago.
He has a 61% approval rating in the state.
61% approval rating. Sometimes you're deceived when you pick a candidate to win a state. It doesn't quite work out. But actually, people don't usually do it for all the talk about it. But if there's any candidate who could win that state, and presumably would do fine in the neighboring, Michigan and Wisconsin, and they are the key at the end of the day, a little more than reaching for North Carolina or even Georgia and Arizona. So holding those, which were so narrow in 2020. So I guess there's a pretty good case for defaulting to Shapiro, who has real candidate skills and who I do think helps by being a little bit against type on a couple of issues, pro-charter schools. I was talking with someone who worked in the Obama administration, very senior. We were joking. They're like, is that really unacceptable? Obama was kind of open to charter schools, and his Secretary of Education, Arne Duncan, was kind of enthusiastic about them.
Right.
Are we really that's not permissible for a Democrat? But I guess the Gaza-Israel stuff is more contentious. They're nervous about some, protests at the convention. But I don't think it would hurt Harris, and B, it might even help again by being looking a little distant from the campus left and so forth.
He's navigating the fracking issue. You just mentioned that. I think it's worth pointing this out. In both of the last two podcasts, Thursday and Friday, I was asking Palmieri and folks how Harris should respond to this question of the far left positions she took during that 2019 primary. And we got a little bit of a preview from it. A spokesperson for Harris put out a statement about fracking over the weekend. Trump's false claims about fracking bans are an obvious attempt to distract from his own plans to enrich oil and gas executives at the expense of the middle class. The Biden-Harris administration passed the largest ever climate change legislation, and under their leadership, America now has the highest ever domestic energy production. The administration created 300,000 energy jobs, while Trump lost nearly 1 million. Went on to just say clearly that they don't have any plans to ban fracking. I kind of like that. I like it. I like just being like, no, we're not going to do it. Turning the page. We'll see how she handles it in an interview setting. It's not, Trump lies a lot. I don't know. We're kind of defining lying down here. It wasn't really a lie, though. It was a plan that she had stated in the past. So the Biden-Harris administration didn't do it. But besides that, I think that's a relatively encouraging statement.
Yeah, and I would almost be more direct, though, and just say, look, I was running for president. That was my view. I've now been vice president for 3.5 years. We've passed A, B, and C. And I now have decided that fracking is part of a sensible, perfectly, environmentally responsible fracking, however she wants to guard it, is part of a responsible energy policy, which includes a lot of clean energy. And fracking turns out to be kind of clean energy, whatever she wants to say. But in other words, use the experience of being vice president as the excuse, to be honest, of moving away from some of these 2019 positions.
I concur with that, obviously. I think the encouraging thing for me is, again, we haven't seen her yet in a hostile interview setting, so TBD. But on the written statements, both on fracking and on the protests, the Gaza protests, the flag burning outside of the outside of Union Station in DC last week, just clear statements, that point to the more consensus position. To me, it is a sign that she's in it to win it. I don't know that they're in it to win, that they're not messing around. There's no need for BSing with this and playing patty cake with the far left activists on some of this stuff. And there's already enough excitement. And I think, to me, the excitement for her gives her the cover to put out statements like this. Right? And there was a new pull out today that the excitement for the Democratic ticket went from like 30-something% who said they were excited up to 80%. Like the enthusiasm gap has been narrowed to nil. There's the TikTok memes. Young folks are excited. They're having all these calls with people who are excited. Use that, right? Like, if you have that excitement built in, you can ride that wave and then kind of tack to appeal to some of the more center swing voters that are necessary. One other opportunity to do this, final topic for today. Last night, the Venezuelan pro-government electoral council said that Maduro won re-election with 51% of the vote, despite the fact that exit polls showed his challenger, Edmundo Gonzalez, had won 65% and Maduro had got just 31%. So this is not just kind of a close call here where they're fudging along the lines. This is a total steal. Government police blocked observers from ballot counting. Neighboring countries, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Peru, are refusing to recognize the sham election result. Tony Blinken says, "We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people." Bill, just any thoughts on the substance of that, but also a potential opportunity for Harris here to take a whack at the commies?
Yeah, I think she needs to really denounce this maybe a little more strongly than Tony Blinken did. And she's in good company with the neighboring countries in Latin America. So she's not, out in some unilateral American kind of trying to overturn an election. She's trying to uphold the voices of the people in Venezuela. And Maduro's been horrible, obviously, following Chavez. And a lot of Venezuelans have come to the U.S. It's not like this is not 10,000 miles away, right? And they're aware of what Maduro is up to, and others from Central and Latin America are as well. So I think it's a good opportunity for her to be strongly denounce this. Exactly what we can do, I don't know. That's a complicated issue. Just quite have to get into that. But
I agree, and also maybe tie it to Trump. By the way, really, if there is this idea that Trump has this kind of Caudillo-esque vibe to him, right? And it's like, look, Trump tried Trump's trying to turn us into Venezuela, right? That the right is gonna. I've already seen it on social media. The right is going to say that, Kamala Harris is going to turn us into a socialist country like Venezuela and blah blah blah. All this nonsense. But the more realistic comparison is that Trump wants to be Maduro. Trump tried to do exactly what he is doing last time. By declaring the Insurrection Act, and just was not competent enough to do it. But who's to say that he wouldn't be able to do it next time? And so I think that there is a way to demonstrate strength on foreign policy, take a hit at the socialists and the corruption in Latin America, and tie it to Trump. So, right, let's do it. Let's roll.
And tie maybe to Trump's buddy Bolsonaro, whom a lot of Trump's closest aides tried to help overturn that election. So you can be anti-Bolsonaro and anti-Maduro and genuinely for democracy. And in the course of that, also point out that Trump is kind of closer to those guys than he is to actually respecting and upholding, a free and fair, maybe not fair entirely in this case, since Maduro is trying to make it unfair, but upholding the will of the people.
I'd also mention that the state in the U.S. that has the third most residents from Venezuela, immigrants from Venezuela, Georgia.
Yes,
an important one on the map. All right, Bill Kristol, thank you so much. We'll see you back here next Monday.